Tonight, something in you is going to change. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when the circumstances finally line up the way you think they need to. Tonight. Because the truth is, you have been waiting for the outside world to shift first, when all along, the outside world has only ever been waiting for you. Understand this. The world you see, the life you are living, the relationships, the money, the body, the opportunities that come or do not come, all of it is a mirror. And a mirror never changes on its own. A mirror waits. It waits for the one standing in front of it to move. You are the one standing in front of it. You have always been the one standing in front of it. Think about this for a moment. How many nights have you gone to sleep rehearsing the day that hurt you? How many mornings have you woken up already bracing for disappointment, already expecting the same tired outcome, already assuming, without even realizing you were assuming, that today would look just like yesterday? You did not choose this consciously. No one sits down and says, I will now assume a life of lack. No one deliberately decides, I will assume rejection, I will assume struggle, I will assume that good things happen to other people, but not to me. And yet, that is exactly the assumption so many of us carry, quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface of our waking thoughts. We inherited it, we absorbed it from the environment, we absorbed it from a household where love felt conditional, from a culture that told us to be realistic, from wounds that taught us to expect the worst, so we would never be surprised by pain again. But hear this clearly. An assumption you did not consciously choose is still shaping your life as powerfully as one you did. The subconscious mind does not ask where a belief came from, it simply acts on it. It takes whatever you assume to be true, and it builds a world to match it. This is why nothing external will ever save you if the internal remains unchanged. This is why you can change your job and still feel unworthy in the new one. This is why you can leave one relationship and still find yourself standing in the same emotional pattern with someone new, wearing a different face, but speaking the same old script. The outer circumstance is never the root, it is only the fruit. And you cannot heal a tree by rearranging its fruit. You must go to the root. You must go within. Let that sink into your spirit for a moment. Within, not out there, not in the next opportunity, not in the next relationship, not in the next dollar amount in your bank account. Within you, in the quiet chamber of your own imagination, is where your entire life is first written before it is ever lived. Neville Goddard spent his life trying to wake people up to this one truth. A truth so simple that the mind often rejects it precisely because it refuses to believe reality could be that intimate, that personal, that entirely dependent on the state of consciousness you occupy. He said that imagination is the very body of God, not a metaphor, not poetry, a literal spiritual law. What you imagine, and specifically what you assume to be true about yourself and your life, becomes the blueprint the unseen uses to construct your circumstances. Consider this. When Scripture says the kingdom of God is within you, it is not offering comfort as a consolation prize for the hardships of this world. It is handing you the deed to your own creative power. The kingdom is not a place you go to when you die. The kingdom is a state of consciousness you occupy while you live. It is the inner realm where every possible version of your life already exists, waiting only to be assumed, waited only to be felt as real, waiting only to be inhabited by you as though it were already so. You are not a beggar outside the gates of your own good, hoping someone else will let you in. You are, whether you have realized it yet or not, the one holding the key the entire time. The key is your assumption. The key is the state you choose, night after night, to fall asleep in. Feel this deeply. Every night you cross a threshold. Sleep is not simply rest for the body. Sleep is a doorway into a deeper level of mind, a level where the conscious, reasoning, doubting part of you steps aside, and the subconscious, the part of you that cannot argue, cannot debate, cannot say, but how, simply receives whatever state you hand it. This is why the state you assume just before sleep carries such extraordinary power. It is not magic in the way the world mocks the word. It is law. It is as consistent and as impartial as gravity. Whatever impression you press into your subconscious in that drowsy, receptive state before sleep, your subconscious will labor through the night and through the days that follow to make it manifest. Notice what happens when you go to bed anxious. You wake up and the anxiety is still there, waiting for you like a familiar, unwelcome guest, coloring the very first thoughts of your day before your feet even touch the floor. Notice what happens when you go to bed replaying an argument, feeling wronged, feeling small, feeling unseen. That feeling does not stay contained to the night. It seeps into the morning. It seeps into the way you speak to the barista, the way you answer an email, the way you carry your shoulders as you walk into a room. Your inner state is never private. It always leaks into your outer world. So imagine now for a moment, what would happen if you deliberately, consciously, lovingly chose a different state to fall asleep in? Imagine going to bed, not rehearsing the wound, but rehearsing the wish fulfilled. Imagine lying there in the dark, and instead of replaying what went wrong, you replay, with your imagination, a scene that implies your desire is already accomplished. Not a wish, not a hope, an assumption, a quiet, settled, inward knowing that this thing you have longed for is already, in truth, done. This is the heart of the law of assumption, and it is worth pausing here, letting this truth breathe, because most people rush past it, the way they rush past every profound thing in their life, always looking for the next technique, the next hack, the next shortcut, when the depth of this single principle, fully understood and fully lived, is enough to transform every single area of your existence. To assume is not to pretend. Pretending keeps one foot in disbelief. Pretending says, I know this isn't real, but I'll play along. Assumption says something entirely different. Assumption says, this is real, and I no longer need to convince myself of it, because I have already, in the deepest chamber of my being, accepted it as so. There is a world of difference between play-acting hope and truly assuming identity. One is a costume, the other is a new skin. You must realize that you are always assuming something. There is no neutral state. Right now, in this very moment, as you listen to these words, you are occupying some assumption about who you are and what your life is capable of becoming. Perhaps you are assuming that you are someone who tries hard but never quite gets ahead. Perhaps you are assuming that you are someone whom love always seems to almost reach and then withdraw from. Perhaps you are assuming that your body will always fight you, that your finances will always be tight, that your dreams are lovely ideas but not real possibilities for someone like you. Every one of these assumptions, whether you named it consciously or not, is currently shaping the very reality you will step into tomorrow. Here is the liberating truth hidden inside this teaching. If you are always assuming something, and if that assumption is always shaping your experience, then you already possess, right now, in this very instant, the power to choose a new one. This is not about acquiring some power you lack. This is about recognizing a power you have been using unconsciously your entire life, and beginning finally to use it on purpose. Let this settle within you. The shift does not require you to change your circumstances first. The shift does not require you to wait for permission, for proof, for evidence that things are getting better before you allow yourself to believe they will. In fact, waiting for evidence is exactly backwards. Evidence is the fruit of assumption, not the seed of it. If you wait to believe until you see proof, you will wait forever, because the outer world can only reflect back to you what you have already accepted within. You must believe first, in the biblical sense of the word, which does not mean intellectual agreement, but rather a deep, embodied trust, a state you live from, rather than a thought you merely entertain. Think about the story of the loaves and the fishes, so often reduced to a simple miracle tale, when in truth it is a profound teaching on the nature of consciousness itself. The abundance was not created from nothing external, it was multiplied from what was already present. Once gratitude, once a settled assumption of sufficiency was applied to it. This is the pattern of all true manifestation. You do not need more resources before you can feel abundant. You need to feel abundant, truly, deeply, subconsciously, and the resources will multiply to match the feeling. The inner state always precedes and produces the outer condition, never the other way around, no matter how convincingly the world tries to teach you otherwise. Understand this. The entire visible world, the world of jobs and paychecks and relationships and diagnoses and dates on a calendar, is the outer garment of an inner cause. Nothing appears in your experience by accident. Nothing arrives uninvited. Every person, every circumstance, every door that opens or closes is being drawn to you or repelled from you by the vibrational signature of your assumed identity. This is not cruelty. This is not a universe out to punish you for your doubts. This is simply law, as impersonal and as faithful as the law that makes water freeze at a certain temperature and boil at another. The law does not care whether you understand it, it only responds to how you use it. And the beautiful, almost unbearable mercy of this truth is that the law can be used starting right now, in this very breath, regardless of how long you have used it unconsciously before. So let us walk together into what it actually means to shift an assumption. Because knowing about this law intellectually and living inside it are two entirely different experiences. The mind loves to collect spiritual concepts the way one collects books never opened, admired on a shelf, quoted at dinner parties, but never actually applied to the marrow of daily life. Tonight you are invited to do something different. Tonight you are invited to actually live this. Begin here. Before you attempt to change anything in your outer world, ask yourself, honestly and without flinching, what you have been assuming. Not what you have been hoping, not what you have been affirming with gritted teeth while your gut whispers otherwise. What have you been assuming in the quiet, unguarded moments about your worth, your safety, your capacity to receive good? You will often find the answer not in your words, but in your reactions. Notice what triggers you. Notice where you brace yourself. Notice the stories you tell yourself when no one is listening. The little narrations that run beneath your day like a subterranean river. Of course this happened to me. I should have known better than to hope. People like me don't get to have that. These small, habitual thoughts are not neutral observations. They are prayers. They are the assumptions your subconscious has been faithfully, tirelessly bringing into form. Now, having seen this clearly, without shame, without self-judgment, because judging yourself for the assumption is simply another layer of the very assumption you are trying to release. Turn gently toward a new one. Not a new one you have to force yourself to believe through sheer willpower, gritting your teeth and repeating words you do not feel. A new one you enter the way you enter a warm bath, slowly, allowing the temperature to become familiar, allowing your body to relax into it, allowing your breath to slow as the new state becomes simply comfortable. Consider this practice, one that Neville himself returned to again and again, because its power lies not in complexity, but in its stunning, almost childlike simplicity. At night before sleep, when the mind is naturally softened, naturally more porous to suggestion, imagine a small scene, a simple moment, that could only occur if your desire were already fulfilled. Not the grand, elaborate fantasy of the whole dream realized at once. A single, intimate moment. If you desire a new relationship rooted in mutual devotion, you might imagine the feeling of a hand in yours, warm, familiar, safe. If you desire prosperity, you might imagine the quiet satisfaction of checking an account and feeling nothing but calm, easy security. If you desire healing, you might imagine the simple sensation of moving through your day without pain, without fear, with vitality humming quietly beneath your skin. The scene does not need to be complicated. It needs to be felt. Felt as though it is happening now, not someday, not eventually, but now. In this imagined moment, you are lovingly, deliberately living inside. And here is where so many, having heard this teaching, still stumble, because they perform the exercise with their mind while their body remains in doubt. The imagination must be felt, not merely pictured. There is a difference between watching a scene like a movie on a screen outside yourself and being inside the scene, sensing what you would sense, hearing what you would hear, feeling the exact texture of the emotion that fulfillment would bring. This is why Neville so often emphasized the phrase, "The feeling is the secret." Not the visualization alone, not the words alone, the feeling. Because feeling is the language the subconscious understands. The subconscious does not process your life in language the way your conscious reasoning mind does. It processes life in sensation, in emotional tone, in vibrational quality. You can say the words, "I am worthy," 1,000 times, but if the felt sense beneath those words remains unworthy, the subconscious will discard the words and act only on the feeling. This is why simply repeating affirmations so often fails to produce lasting change, and why so many people, having tried and failed at surface-level positive thinking, dismiss this entire body of teaching as wishful nonsense. The failure was never in the law. The failure was in mistaking words for feeling, mistaking performance for embodiment. Real transformation happens not when you say new words, but when you inhabit a new identity so completely that the old assumption simply has nowhere left to live. Allow yourself to see this clearly. You are not being asked to lie to yourself. You are being asked to remember the truth of who you actually are beneath the conditioning, beneath the wounds, beneath the years of accepting a smaller story because it felt safer than risking the pain of a bigger one that might not come true. Somewhere beneath every fear you carry is a version of you that has never doubted its own worth. Somewhere beneath every scarcity you have known is a consciousness that understands abundance as its natural inheritance. You are not manufacturing a false identity when you shift your assumption. You are excavating the one that was buried under years of misidentification with circumstance. Think about a child. Before the world has taught them what they cannot have, what they do not deserve, who they are not allowed to become. A child asks for what they want without apology. A child imagines without hesitation, builds castles in the mind with total, uncomplicated confidence that of course the castle is real, of course the adventure is happening, of course they are the hero of the story. Somewhere along the way, most of us were taught to abandon this natural authority. We were taught, gently or harshly, that imagination is childish, that hope is naive, that the responsible, mature thing to do is to lower our expectations so reality can never disappoint us. But hear this truth, spoken with love and with absolute conviction. That teaching was a lie. It was not wisdom, it was fear, dressed up as maturity, and it has cost generations of beautiful, capable souls the very lives they were destined to live. You are being invited tonight to reclaim what was taken from you, not through force, not through struggle, through the simple, quiet, radical act of choosing a new assumption and living faithfully inside it until it becomes once again your natural state. The truth is, this shift does not require you to become someone you are not. It requires you to stop pretending, through years of contracted living, to be someone smaller than you actually are. Every limitation you have accepted about yourself is a costume, worn so long you have forgotten it was ever removable. Tonight, you are invited to loosen the seams. Let this settle within you. There is a difference between the person you have been and the person you are choosing to become. And that difference lives entirely in the state you occupy, moment to moment, thought to thought, breath to breath. You do not need a different set of circumstances to become this new person. You need to become this new person first, in consciousness, and the circumstances, faithfully, inevitably, will rearrange themselves to reflect the change. This is why Neville taught that you must live in the end, not in the anxious hoping for the end, not in the exhausting striving toward the end, in the end itself, as though it has already occurred, as though the desire is already fulfilled, and all that remains is the simple unfolding of details in time. This is a radical reorientation of how most people relate to their own lives. Most people live in the problem and hope from within the problem to eventually arrive at the solution. But consciousness does not work by starting in lack and striving toward abundance. Consciousness works by assuming the abundance first, inwardly, completely, and allowing the outer world, which has no choice but to obey the law, to rearrange itself to match. Feel this deeply. This is not about denying what is currently in front of you. It is not about pretending the bills are not there, or the diagnosis has not been given, or the relationship has not ended. It is about recognizing that what is currently in front of you is simply the outer expression of a previous assumption, one that no longer has to define what comes next. The present moment is not a prison, it is a threshold. What you do with your inner state right now, in this very moment, is far more powerful in determining your future than any fact currently visible in your outer circumstances. Consider this. Every great transformation recorded in Scripture involved a moment where an individual had to relate to an unseen reality as though it were already more real than the seen one. Abraham was called to see himself as the father of many nations while he remained childless. Not someday, now. The name itself was changed before the child arrived, because the identity had to shift before the manifestation could follow. This is the pattern, again and again, throughout every sacred text, in every tradition of inner transformation. The name changes first, the identity shifts first, the assumption is claimed first, and only then, in what appears to the outer eye as time, does the visible world catch up to what has already been decided within. You must realize that time itself is not the obstacle so many believe it to be. Time is simply the medium through which assumption unfolds into experience. It is not evidence against the law, it is the space in which the law operates. When you shift your assumption tonight, you may not see the outer world respond tonight, or tomorrow, or even next week. This does not mean the law has failed you. It means the seed has been planted, and every seed requires its season beneath the soil before it breaks through into visible growth. Doubt during this season is the single greatest threat to what you are cultivating, because doubt is simply a return to the old assumption, and the subconscious, ever faithful, ever obedient, will simply resume building whatever state you occupy most consistently. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. One powerful night of imagining the wish fulfilled, followed by weeks of returning to old fear, old scarcity, old self-doubt, will not produce the transformation you seek. The subconscious responds to the dominant, habitual state, not the occasional spike of inspired feeling. This is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to free you from the exhausting, all-or-nothing perfectionism that so often sabotages spiritual growth. You do not need to be flawless in this practice. You simply need to return again and again, gently, without self-punishment, to the new assumption every time you notice yourself slipping into the old one. Each return is not a failure. Each return is training. Each return strengthens the neural and spiritual pathway toward the identity you are choosing to inhabit. Imagine, for a moment, the version of yourself who has already made this shift. Fully, completely, effortlessly. What does she feel like in her body? What does he trust, without needing proof, about the way life responds to him? How does she walk into a room? How does he handle an unexpected setback? Not with panic, but with the calm, settled knowing that setbacks are simply detours, never verdicts. This version of you is not a fantasy. This version of you is the truer version, the one obscured by years of conditioned smallness, waiting patiently, without impatience, without judgment, for you to remember and reclaim her. You are not your past disappointments. You are not the sum of every door that has closed. You are not the years you spent believing you were unworthy of the very things you quietly, desperately longed for. You are not the diagnosis, the debt, the breakup, the rejection letter, the year everything fell apart. These were experiences. They were not identities. They were outer expressions of an assumption that has already served its purpose in bringing you to this exact threshold, this exact moment of choice, this exact invitation to begin again. You are, in truth, an expression of the very consciousness that spoke light into darkness, that called order out of chaos, that said, and it was so. This is not metaphor. This is the literal inheritance you carry, the divine imagination operating through you every single moment, whether you have claimed it consciously or allowed it to run unconsciously toward outcomes you never intended to create. The same creative power that formed galaxies moves through your capacity to imagine, to assume, to feel a state as real before it has appeared in the visible world. You have been using this power your entire life, often without realizing it, often toward ends you would never have chosen if you had known you were choosing them. Tonight, that unconscious use ends, and a conscious, intentional partnership with your own divine creative capacity begins. Let this truth move through you slowly. You do not need permission from anyone to claim a new identity. You do not need your circumstances to validate the shift before you are allowed to make it. You do not need years of therapy, or a certain amount of money in the bank, or someone else's approval before you are worthy of assuming a life of peace, abundance, love, and purpose. The assumption comes first, always first. This is the law, and the law does not negotiate, does not delay for your comfort, does not require you to earn what has, in truth, always already been yours. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, I invite you to try something different than you have ever tried before. Or perhaps something you have tried before, but are now ready to try with a depth of feeling you have not yet allowed yourself. Lie quietly. Let your body soften into the mattress. Let your breath slow, naturally, without forcing it. And instead of reviewing the day that passed, choose, deliberately, a single scene that implies the fulfillment of what you most desire. Not the whole story, a single moment. Enter it as though your physical senses were present within it. Feel the textures, hear the sounds, notice the quality of the emotion, the specific flavor of relief, joy, gratitude, or peace that this fulfilled desire would bring. Stay there, not for hours. A few minutes of vivid, genuinely felt imagination, repeated with devotion, night after night, carries more transformative power than years of anxious, scattered thinking during your waking hours. And when doubt arises, because it will, because the old assumption does not release its grip without some resistance, do not fight it. Do not shame yourself for still having fear. Simply notice it. Acknowledge it gently, the way you might acknowledge an old friend who no longer fits into the life you are building, and return, softly, without struggle, to the felt sense of the wish fulfilled. This returning, this gentle redirection of attention, night after night, is the entire practice. It is not complicated. It is not reserved for the spiritually advanced. It is available to you, exactly as you are, right now, in whatever state you find yourself in as you hear these words. Understand this: the world you wake up to tomorrow will still on the surface look much like the world you fell asleep in tonight. This is not evidence that nothing has changed. Seeds do not sprout the instant they are planted, but something, invisibly, has shifted. A new cause has been set into motion, and causes, faithfully, patiently, without exception, produce effects. Trust this the way you trust the sunrise, not because you can control it, but because you have witnessed, again and again, throughout all of human history, that certain laws simply do not fail. You are being invited into a different relationship with your own life. One where you are no longer at the mercy of what happens to you, but a conscious participant in what flows through you. This is not a burden. This is the deepest freedom available to a human being. It means you are never truly trapped, never truly without options, never truly at the end of what is possible. Because the moment you shift your assumption, you have already begun to shift your world, regardless of what the outer eye can currently perceive. Let this settle within you one final time before you carry it forward into your night, into your sleep, into the quiet unfolding of the days ahead. You are not waiting for life to change so that you can finally feel at peace. You are meant to feel at peace, to feel abundant, to feel loved, to feel whole, first, within, and to allow that inner state, faithfully assumed, to become the very soil from which your changed life grows. This has always been the order of creation: consciousness first, manifestation second. Never the other way around, no matter how convincingly the visible world has tried to teach you otherwise. There is one more layer to this teaching, one that deserves your full attention, because it is the layer most often skipped, and its absence is why so many sincere, well-meaning people practice this law faithfully and still feel as though nothing moves. That layer is this: you cannot assume a new state while simultaneously arguing with your current one. Every time you look at your bank account and say, with a sigh, "See, nothing has changed," you have just fed a fresh dose of belief into the very condition you are trying to dissolve. Every time you catch yourself in the mirror and repeat an old, tired verdict about your body, your face, your worth, you have quietly overwritten the seed you planted the night before. The subconscious does not distinguish between the assumption you hold at midnight and the assumption you hold at noon. It simply averages your dominant state across the whole of your day, and it builds according to that average. This is why the discipline is not only in the nightly practice, but in the quiet, ongoing refusal throughout your waking hours to keep rehearsing the old story out loud in your thoughts or in the words you speak to others about your own life. Notice how often we describe ourselves using the language of permanence for conditions that were only ever meant to be temporary. I am always broke. I never get chosen. This always happens to me. Listen to the weight of that word, always. Always is not a description of fact. Always is a spell cast by your own mouth over your own future. Every time you speak it, you renew the very assumption you say you want to be free of. This is why the wise, the awakened, the ones who have learned to walk closely with this law, become so careful with their words, not from superstition, but from understanding. Words are not neutral sounds. Words are the visible edge of an inner state, and every time you speak, you either reinforce the old identity or you announce the new one. This does not mean you must lie about your circumstances, insisting everything is wonderful when you are in fact struggling. It means you begin to separate the temporary condition from your permanent identity. You can say, honestly, this is what is currently showing up, while inwardly holding, without argument, without despair, and this is not the truth of who I am, nor the final word on where I am going. This distinction changes everything. It allows you to remain grounded in reality without becoming a prisoner of it. It allows you to acknowledge the fact without worshipping it as the final, unchangeable truth. Consider this too. The shift you are being called toward tonight is not a single event, completed once and then forgotten. It is a relationship you enter with your own consciousness, renewed daily, sometimes hourly, for as long as it takes for the new assumption to become as natural to you as breathing. In the beginning it will feel effortful, because every new identity feels foreign before it feels familiar. A muscle you have never used trembles the first time you ask it to lift real weight. This trembling is not failure. This trembling is evidence that something is finally actually being exercised. Do not mistake the discomfort of growth for proof that the growth is not working. You are not being asked to believe blindly without any inner confirmation. As you continue this practice, faithfully, night after night, you will begin to notice small, unmistakable signs. A sense of lightness that was not there before. A calm that meets situations which once would have thrown you into panic. Small synchronicities, coincidences, too precise to easily dismiss. Doors opening in ways that feel almost too gentle to be accidental. These are not proof that manipulate you into belief. They are simply the natural early evidence that the inner shift is already, quietly, rearranging the outer world to match it. Let these small signs encourage you, not as validation you needed to keep going, but as gentle confirmation that you were never wrong to trust this in the first place. So tonight, gently, without force, without struggle, choose again. Choose the identity that reflects who you actually are, beneath every wound, every doubt, every year of smallness you were taught to accept. Feel it as real. Trust the unseen the way you would trust a friend who has never once broken a promise. And rest, knowing that somewhere, in the invisible architecture of your own mind, the world you have longed for is already being assembled, quietly, faithfully, exactly as you have assumed it to be.